It's 5 o'clock in London, it's 6 p.m. here in Granada, Spain, it's midday in New York, midnight in Hong Kong, 4 a.m. in Sydney, 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and 10:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young. The IPO-VID Livestream, Series 28, Episode 1, that is in the aggregate, episode number 163, starts here. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have introductions because we're looking back on what's been an incredible year in the world of exchanges. A year when, good grief, only in the last month alone, we saw 6 exchanges sweeping in to buy the Aqua Stock Exchange in London, a very interesting deal that also gives 6 a fascinating franchise in selling technology to other markets. That was just one of many highlights from throughout the course of the year. Today, we're going to be joined by a selection of our previous guests. They're going to be talking about what they said when we were discussing a question which had an appropriate 25th anniversary message this year. Where do you think the capital market revolution goes next? Thus, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I think we should jump straight into our first guest, and let's go and talk to market maven John Files. John was our guest on the 23rd of January this year, IPO video number 129. The topic was disruption and growth. John has been working in global capital markets for over 30 years. He's managed businesses. Indeed, he was the chief executive officer of Chi-X Australia, the upstart, which managed to make a remarkable dent in the lumbering monopolist of the ASX nowadays. Of course, a somewhat more discredited enterprise, the ASX, thanks to the nimbleness of competitors such as Chi-X Australia under John Files. He's been widely involved in managing projects, industry associations in the UK, the US, Europe. Actually, do you know what, ladies and gentlemen? I think he's been on every continent organizing market infrastructure, with the exception of the Arctic Circle and Antarctica, whichever one of those qualifies as a continent, because I can never remember. So with that sort of global experience, fascinating to see what John had to say. Let's hear from John.
I'm a big believer in tokenization. And I do believe that the area that will be most impacted by tokenization is alternatives or private assets, which far outweigh the size of the public markets today. We do believe that carbon markets will continue to grow, and they have to grow in order for us to correct the problems with climate change.
What a fascinating concept. First of all, of course, obviously that if we are going to get anywhere close to the sort of goals that are being expected of us from the centrally planned masters of the world's governments in terms of carbon markets, carbon credits, and reducing emissions, then it's obviously going to have to fall to markets to try and help that. And I know that a former guest of ours, Professor Richard Sander, would be saying hear, hear at this point in time if you're watching, Doc, because, of course, he was the man who brought in the sulfur market, which essentially managed to remove acid rain within a matter of a couple of years. Anyway, tokenization, now there's an interesting topic to conjure with. What is going to be the future of tokenization? Rather controversially, I think it's going to be huge. I think real world assets are going to be huge, but I'm not entirely convinced that they're going to need a cumbersome blockchain in order to do so. That, however, leads us very interestingly from one group of commodities, aka carbon credits, to another. Brad Schaefer, commodities trader, sometime musician, author of 3 published books, and accomplished historian. He was our guest on the 6th of February of this year for IPO-VID number 131. The topic of his conversation was From the Floor to the Future with former NYMEX trader Brad Schaefer. Let's hear from Brad.
It's going to be AI everywhere, I think. I think in terms of execution, AI is going to be taking over a lot of it.
Short and sweet there. Well, this was, of course, one of those times when everybody was getting wildly excited about ChatGPT and all of these other machine learning tools, which seem to now occupy virtually every second strand of social media, Instagram, you name it, when people are talking about how it's going to wipe out the humans, although we get to the end of the year and there seems to be life in the old human yet. Nonetheless, very interesting report out today from NASDAQ. It'll be an Exchange Invest tomorrow, talking all about this very, very interesting process whereby more machine learning tools, artificial intelligences, are being deployed by leading market infrastructures in order to help with compliance regimes, with oversight of markets the world over. And a great thing that is too, and a very, very useful deployment of artificial intelligence it is. So that was Brad Schaefer. Now, of course, underpinning the safety of our markets is much more than merely artificial intelligence in surveillance. It's the clearing mechanism. And when it comes to clearing and settlement, of course, what can be more important than the central counterparty clearinghouses, the CCPs that are so vital to the smooth functioning of financial markets? In Europe, they're represented by each, the European Association of CCP clearinghouses, and it was our delight to have the Secretary General of each, Rafael Plata, join us on the 13th of February for IPO-VID number 132, when we were discussing the very simple topic, clearing Europe with Rafael Plata. Let's hear from Rafael.
Two things that could actually affect the capital markets were there's endless possibilities of quantum computing, obviously for every application. That is one. The other one, extremely important, would be financial literacy.
Now, there's an interesting point. Financial literacy, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to hear from that again, actually, this week and next week. Really, really vital topic. And yet, are we, as a parish, really doing as much as we generally could? I'm not convinced. I think there's a huge way to go. And I think at the same time, there's a very, very vital message out there that while the governments are all busy regulating, they're not doing any educating. And that is a huge failure in the government system where it intermeshes with markets today. Quantum computing, interesting that we hear from the sort of people who are trying to hypothecate and novate as many trades as possible in the blink of an eye. What they're looking at is greater power. Quantum computing and CCPs, that could be a really interesting concept altogether. As we move through the year talking about where does the capital market revolution goes next, let's look at the 20th of February 2024, IPO-VID number 133. We were unlocking Namibian growth with Tian Bazawin, the Chief Executive Officer of the Namibian Securities Exchange. Let's hear from Tian.
I think, at least in terms of the region goes, Namibia is going to be the center of the universe for the next couple of years, and it's going to be a very interesting ride.
And of course, the very interesting ride there is being heard from the man who heads up the Namibian Stock Exchange. What's so exciting for them? The fact that they've just discovered oil and gas in a series of fields just offshore from Namibia. A fascinating opportunity there. It's going to revolutionize that huge nation, albeit with the population of a Baltic state rather than the population of a massive African state across a huge area. Very, very interesting to watch. We're intrigued to see where Tian goes next because it is going to be a very interesting ride indeed. Now, Hamish Adurian, there's a man who knows a great deal about the ups and downs of deploying market technology from his position as head of sales and marketing at Sonara. He was talking to us about the holistic exchange and operational resilience. That was on February the 27th in IPO-VID 134. Let's hear it from his second appearance on the show, Hamish Adurian.
AI is going to impact all of those different areas, not just the current of the large language models. We'll see new markets coming in as well, technology enabling things that perhaps weren't exchange traded previously, coming into exchanges, the new exchanges being created. Certainly consolidation, I think will inevitably continue.
So there's an interesting point generated from the whole artificial intelligence debate, ladies and gentlemen. Hamish Durian, the head of sales and marketing at Sonara, talking about how when you look at operational resilience of exchanges, when you look at the holistic exchange in its entirety, what can AI do for it? Not just make things more efficient. We've been talking about that NASDAQ paper that was released today and will be discussed in Exchange Invest newsletter tomorrow. We're also talking about the opportunity to create whole new markets that may be better facilitated through the sorts of tools that artificial intelligence delivers. And that's got to be a fascinating prospect to deliver all sorts of new operations and new holistic exchanges, some of which quite feasibly have not even been considered yet. One man we've had a joy chatting with on several occasions during the course of this past year has been the absolutely magnificent Rainer Zittelmann. He made his first appearance on the show last year. He is a polyglot, he is a polymath, and he also happens to be sensationally prolific. Now, one of his books that we talked about was on IPO-VID number 135 on the 5th of March, and we were looking at Unbreakable Spirit. That was a book by Rainer Zittelmann, which talks about people and and how with their disabilities they've overcome incredible challenges in order to manage to become hugely successful. All manner of blind and deaf artists, historically, of course, none more famous, I suppose, than Ludwig van Beethoven, as he was going deaf while he was composing his Ninth Symphony. But there are many people in here who are quite incredible, talking about all manner of interesting things. Nonetheless, when it came to Unbreakable Spirit, and when he was asked the question again of where does the capital market revolution go next, we got a really interesting answer. Let's hear that from Rainer.
About the space economy, I think today it's not a big topic at the stock exchanges, but my feeling is in the next 10 years, it will become a big, big story.
Space, the final frontier, ladies and gentlemen. A huge opportunity in markets, and actually one quite intriguing we've been pursuing through our private enterprises during the course of some time recently. Rainer just happened to be chatting about it to us the other week before this event, and I said, gosh, that's a fabulous topic of conversation. It came up as his revolutionary answer, and I agree. Where we look at Earth today and its markets, there's still huge opportunities, as, for example, Hamish Adurian was just mentioning, but the possibility from the space economy is utterly enormous. It is a multiplier of what we already have on Earth, albeit where are the markets going to be that are going to drive that forward? Well, I suspect it's going to be the same free market enterprises on Earth that will look to the orbital space environment and beyond in order to manage to deliver returns, which I suppose one might say could possibly be to infinity and beyond. A man who understands infinity was our next guest, Gunnar Stephenson. He was our guest on the 19th of March, 2024. How appropriate, came a couple of days after St. Patrick's Day, and therefore everybody was smiling around the world, along with all of the Irish people who'd been celebrating 2 days earlier. IPO-VID 136 was Smiley Coin, the happy face of crypto. Gunnar is a professional statistician. He is a lecturer at the university in Reykjavik in Iceland and fascinated in the progression of education and also the development of the blockchain. When it came to talking about Smiley Coin, he had some fascinatingly interesting thoughts on where the revolution goes next. Let's hear from Gunnar.
So I think the next step in the capital market revolution is mangoes. We've written into our next project proposal to see if we can do something simple like grow trees in the schoolyard. Smiley isn't just a one-way street from the Smiley tutor back to Smiley charity. It becomes a circular economy. I think this is one of the steps we need to take to make it more useful.
So there you have it. Now, let me just take a step back in case you missed that show. It's a really super show. I thoroughly recommend you go and look at number 136 from the 19th of March. Smiley Coin is a coin which enables education. How does it do that? Well, it's a crypto coin. It sits on its own lovely little blockchain. And effectively, when you are a student in places like Nairobi in Kenya, you earn smileys by studying. What can you do with those? The great thing is you can use them for essential things that you need to study, essential hygiene products that you need to get to school, particularly if you're a young lady. All of the things that you can do all the way through to a tablet or a laptop, you can manage to earn through the whole concept of Smiley Coin. And therefore, what an interesting concept from the blockchain. Dr. Gunnar was looking back from his professorial chair and saying the next step in the capital market revolution is mangoes, because we're going to see going to a genuine real world assets. It's the next possibility, because if they can grow trees in the schoolyard, it's something that provides food, provides revenue, and further advances education in nations, in Africa, in other parts of the world where there are emerging markets. And let's face it, the more we can educate our next generation, the more opportunity we have to grow prosperity and build better markets. I'm really looking forward to seeing Gunnar Stephenson. Hopefully I'm going to see him at the AFM conference in February next year, which we're all looking forward to. Should be a fabulous event, and he'll be talking about Smiley Coin at that event. Moving on, our eighth guest of today was Magnus Haglund, the head of marketplace technology within the marketplace platforms division of NASDAQ. He joined us on the 26th of March for IPO-VID number 137. His topic was modernizing markets. Well, let's hear from Magnus.
different. We're going to be, cloud's going to be an underlying fabric of how we operate. And
so ultimately, here we go. Magnus's head is quite reasonably in the cloud of markets. That is, of course, a very important year for NASDAQ and their marketplace technology business this year, with a huge amount of more productivity from cloud-derived marketplaces. You can now service everything you want from the excellent technology stack of NASDAQ in the cloud, indeed, to run everything from the smallest market in the world to some of the largest low latency stock markets, options markets, and so on. Absolutely fascinating. It is a question of timeline and perspective, how the revolution is going to continue to develop, even though it is already 25 years young. But certainly we're going to be doing it vastly from the cloud rather than on premises. Now, when it comes to being on premises in financial markets, then there's one thing that we need to look at, and it's been a huge debate during the course of this year. Just last week, we see the application by 24 Exchange being given the right to an all-day long stock market. They're going to move in 2 tiers towards getting towards 23-hour-a-day trading. We're going to have more from other parties in that space coming before the end of this show, but we wish Dmitry Galanov all the best with his endeavor, which has now been green-lighted by the SEC and should be going live hopefully around about this time next year. But when we look at all of that topic, one of the things we've been producing all year long, ladies and gentlemen, as well as Exchange Invest, the newsletter of the Bourse Business, alongside our weekly podcast, giving a quick resume of what have been the major stories in the Bourse Business, and of course, alongside this IPO-VID live stream, the opportunity to chat to all manner of market luminaries. There have been our short videos, which you can catch on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, and all sorts of other sources. In Big World has been a faithful source of information, and here is a case where we started talking about globalized US stock markets. Meanwhile, in Big World, why on earth does someone want to trade American stocks 22 hours a day? The truth is, it's not the same person. There are myriads of people around the world who want to be part of 60.5% of the entire world's market capitalization. US stock markets are therefore, the proposal from NYSE Arca is to open 22 hours a day from 1:30 in the morning to 11:30 at night. That's been driven by Blue Ocean Technologies, who open 8 o'clock in the evening to 4 in the morning, and they dovetail beautifully with trading in Southeast Asia. Millions of Koreans, people in Hong Kong, people in Japan are eager to trade the US stock market. Let's give them the opportunity. Let's globalize the US market. After all, it's the globally dominant market in the world. For more in Big World, like or follow. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Mention of Blue Ocean. We'll be coming back to them in just a moment. And actually, if you haven't been keeping up with the debate about 24-hour-a-day stock market trading, about Blue Ocean's incredible rise to fame in the US market space, and their absolutely amazing day that they had on the day of Trump's general election victory in the presidential elections on November the 5th, you ought to be reading Exchange Invest. It is $499 per user year, but don't think about it as a cost. Think about it as an investment. You can't afford to be without Exchange Invest if you're in the parish of market structure and a credible professional, because that's what the market leaders in this business are watching, reading, and daily participating in via our platform at exchangeinvest.com. You can sign up for a free 7-day trial right now. Please go ahead. You want to be ahead of the business of bourses, then you need the exchange of information, Exchange Invest. So talking about those globalized stock market hours, it's also worth thinking about the US dollar. Once again, the US dollar has come under attack throughout the course of this year. The BRICS are saying that they're going to have all sorts of magnificent new initiatives. The trouble is, ladies and gentlemen, nobody yet has really spelt out how these sorts of things might possibly work. Well, actually, now there is a fantastic book for it. Our guest coming up next year in IPO-VID will be Kathleen Tyson. She is a true polyglot of markets, and her book, Multi-Currency Mercantilism, is our finance book of the week. The world is shifting from 80 years of dollar dominance, she portends, and US hegemony to a pluralist multi-currency mercantilism is arising. Multi-currency mercantilism, the new international monetary order by Kathleen Tyson, explains why the shift is happening now and explores what the new monetary order may bring. Get yourselves a copy of that book, ladies and gentlemen. It's certainly much more interesting reading over Christmas and a great deal of things that you could possibly get. And don't forget, if you want to stay ahead and abreast of what's going on in the world of exchanges, you will need Exchange Invest via exchangeinvest.com, the exchange of information. Now, as we move on, I mentioned earlier the blue ocean phenomenon, this very, very exciting platform opening overnight. And in fact, that brings us elegantly to our next guest. On the 9th of April, 2024, we had the joy of welcoming Thomas Caldwell. Tom was the man who at one stage was the largest private holder of seats in the New York Stock Exchange. And that was all because he and Urbana Corporation, which he's a CEO and director of, could foresee what was happening in the world of exchange market investments. It was a joy to welcome him from his Nerve Center headquarters in Toronto, Canada. We were discussing exchanging investments with Tom Caldwell. Let's hear from Tom.
World trade has helped human progress dramatically. We can't leave people behind. Everybody's worrying about changing the world's temperature. There are people starving. Let's deal with improving standards of living.
What a great message. That, ladies and gentlemen, is of course something the revolution must do. Never mind sticking things on obscure blockchains that might blow up at any point in time. We need to be feeding the world. We need to be making sure that the world is becoming more prosperous. We need to help them with smiley coins in order to educate them. And that's, of course, why IPO-VID Live exists, in order to have these sorts of great positive messages about how markets can manage to make a difference for people around the world. And truly, allowing people to make sure that those who are left starving, those who are left without sufficient food, are catered for is something that's vitally important as we educate and indeed feed a new generation and improve their standard of living. Alongside Thomas Caldwell, somebody who's been in the forefront of improving standards of living throughout the course of his career is the magnificent Bharat Kulkarni. I had the joy of a long conversation with Bharat this year at the AFM, the Association of Futures Markets meeting in Bangkok in Thailand, a spectacular meeting hosted by the Stock Exchange of Thailand. Really, really excellent conference from start to finish. I had the honor of being the keynote speaker once again for the AFM, which was a real joy. On April 16th, Bharat joined us from his home in India for IPO-VID number 139. We were discussing markets, the winds of change, and that was against the background of Bharat's history working as a consultant in the field of agricultural project investment, the agricultural value chain, market microstructure. In other words, all the things that Thomas Caldwell is eager to see improved, as we all are, in order to make a better, prosperous and better fed world. And indeed also, Bharat was very closely involved, and that was his book, The Winds of Change, all about building the Ethiopian Commodity Exchange, ECX, a trailblazer in African commodity exchanges in recent decades. Let's hear from Bharat.
I would say it's India, because there are a lot of things that are happening in India. If you actually look at the Indian economy, it is one of the fastest growing economy in the world. Very high disposable incomes. Millions of investors have actually come into the market, which means that there's a lot of inflow coming into the market. The markets are becoming very, very wide-based.
A fascinating insight, because indeed, when we talk about the capital market revolution, it's very easy to forget just how much of that revolution was actually itself fed from India. If we look at the National Stock Exchange of India, NSE, nowadays the dominant player, it was created to be an electronic alternative to the somewhat, well, antediluvian, decrepit at that point in time, one might say politely. Historic is another way of putting it. Bombay Stock Exchange, which is of course since electronified itself, but at that time the Bombay Stock Exchange was backwards with a huge amount of paper. The National Stock Exchange came in, they built an incredible all-electronic infrastructure that reached all the corners of the Indian subcontinent, as indeed the multi-commodity exchange under Jignesh Shah, before he is unfortunately fell from grace in the Indian exchange firmament. But nonetheless, when you look at it, 1.15 billion people in India, a fast-growing population, a very fast-growing economy. Where would the capital market revolution go next? Yes, of course, it's India. Although at the same time, we're still looking for those better improvements and easier ways for foreigners to invest in the Indian financial markets and the Indian commodity markets, because at the moment it's very challenging, even though great progress is being made in Gift City in Gujarat. And we're looking forward to that playing a much larger, enhanced role as a conduit, a gateway to Indian investment in the years to come. Thank you again to Bharat for his excellent contribution. And in the end of April, we had a couple of fascinating conversations. The first one was with Chris Skinner. He's a man who has run the Financial Services Club, now owned by Michael Manelli's ZN. He has been, on various occasions, noted as being one of the most influential people around the fintech circuit, and he's a best-selling author of many tomes on the future of banking and other financial services practices. His title for his discussion, a very, very zingy one. Do we need intermediaries? That was on the 23rd of April 2024, IPO-VID number 140. Let's hear from Chris.
I've always been fascinated by proximity trading and server structures. And I kind of wonder where that's going, which is if everybody everywhere was linked globally in a nanosecond, what would that mean for capital markets?
If everybody everywhere was linked globally in a nanosecond, what would that mean for capital markets? Certainly a much more profound message than you're going to get out of your Christmas crackers this year, ladies and gentlemen. That's one thing. Something to think about, talk about around the water cooler in the near future, perhaps. An interesting link, therefore, to our 12th guest of today, Roland Bellegarde. He's the senior advisor to the group CEO of the Saudi Tadawul Group, and previously was a very senior figure within both the Paris Stock Exchange and then the growing Euronext and NYSE Euronext combines as they were through to 2007, 2008. He joined us on the 30th of April 2024. He was coming from Riyadh in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for IPO-VID number 141. His title was Modernizing Saudi Markets, Modernizing Tadawul, with an eye, of course, to the local exchange provider that he works for. Let's hear from Roland.
In my view, the world is moving to east. Capital markets are moving to the east.
Short, sweet, succinct, and accurate. What else can we say about that message? The world is moving east, capital markets are moving to the east, something which I have been saying myself for the course of many years. And what does that leave the Middle East as? Well, it leaves the Middle East as the most fascinating conduit, where there are a host of airlines trying to be the extension between north and south and east and west on the fascinating curvature of the earth, whether it's Turkish Airlines or Emirates or indeed something like the, say, Abu Dhabi airline Etihad, amongst others. So to now we have a series of fascinating exchanges growing up, and Tadawul, as it has liberalized the market and as it has opened up to outside investors, is trying very hard to be a leading player in that market and a conduit to capital as the world is moving east, as indeed we've seen in recent months with the Saudi exchange Tadawul opening all sorts of interesting lines and ventures, and even an office in the special administrative region of Hong Kong in order to help access the Hong Kong market, and with it, of course, Hong Kong exchanges connect the gateway to China. Not just that, of course, also other deals by Tadawul this year have included their buying a significant chunk of what was pretty much moribund. The DME, the Dubai Mercantile Exchange, has now become the Gulf Mercantile Exchange to be a commodities futures hub, hopefully out of the Dubai Financial Services Centre itself. So that was a great conversation we had with Roland during the course of April. That leads us on very elegantly to, well, we've already been trailering the fact that he was going to be coming into this particular discussion, trailing Brian Heintman, the Chief Executive Officer, President of Blue Ocean Technologies, LLC. He joined us on the 7th of May, and in many ways, the revolution he's portending is something that's easily as big as that thing that happened on the 1st of May, or at least used to be celebrated on the 1st of May around the world. It was IPO-VID number 142. We were talking about Blue Ocean, a new market tide. Let's hear from Brian.
More and more brokers are signing up. More and more brokers want to offer 24/5 trading, not 24/7, 365. The light is pretty bright. We're blazing the path, but I see 24/5 U.S. equity trading is here to stay.
24/5 U.S. equity trading is here to stay. Of course, that's coming from the man who currently occupies pole position. between 2000 hours and 0400 hours in the morning with the Blue Ocean platform that is trading all the way across Asia and around the world. And also, of course, for US investors, as I mentioned earlier, I think they did something like 3 or 4 times their biggest previous day's volume on the night of the Trump elections. And what's very interesting there is also that what we're seeing from these overnight platforms is not merely the trading of a few top names. It's not all about trading Nvidia or Tesla or other household name stocks like Microsoft or Apple or the other trillion-dollar stocks in the US, trillion-dollar stocks being quite the topic of conversation we had during the course of the year in our IBW in Big World segments on our short videos. But rather, what you're seeing is 2,500, something like that, NMS names, national market structure names. Another 2,500 out of the 4,000-ish listed names in the USA tend to trade every month on Blue Ocean. That's a spectacular number. And of course, don't forget, what's key about this? The truth is, Blue Ocean is turning into a stonkingly good investment for Thomas Caldwell and the Urbana team. They were an early investor into that platform. Subsequently, Japan Exchange bought 5% of it. There's going to be a huge amount of debate and discussion and excitement about this. I know in America, there are certain people who are worried about it. FINRA, the broker-dealers, they're all concerned. But the truth is, go back to what we were talking about on Big World earlier this session. The reality is, we're not talking about American dealers being up all night and trading stocks. We're talking about different discrete books handing their trading books across the world in the same way that the world's biggest markets, Forex, foreign exchange, trades to this day, 24 hours a day, 5, actually pretty much 6 days a week now in the case of the marketplace there. And I think it's a good point that Brian makes. We're not talking about 24/7, 365 days a year, something that the crypto bros have tried to bring in. It is going to be 24/5. It's going to be starting at somewhere around midnight, late evening on a Sunday in the USA, probably 8 o'clock Sunday in the USA, of course, is where Blue Ocean is opening, and then trades all the way through until effectively Friday afternoon in the US, when we see the closing bell of the New York Stock Exchange. The closing bell, now there's something I might talk about in the next show, of course, when we're reviewing the year, ladies and gentlemen. From Blue Ocean Technologies, we went all the way across the ocean, right into the heart of Africa. We joined Thapelo Chole at a very, very interesting juncture in his career. He had just departed as the chief executive of the Botswana Stock Exchange, where he's been super successful. In fact, Botswana Stock Exchange hosting a very, very successful African Capital Markets Congress for exchanges just this week for the African SEA, the Exchanges Association there. Nowadays, Thapelo has moved seamlessly into a very interesting job. He's the CEO of the Rwanda Capital Markets Authority. Thapelo joined us on the 14th of May this year, 2024, for IPO-VID number 143. We were talking about Botswana rising, but it was also very much a theme underpinning it of Africa rising with Thapelo Chole. Let's hear from Thapelo.
I think it's quite clear the capital markets revolution is going much more to digital type of means. It's going into a direction where we're going to see a lot of interconnectedness among markets. You can know that.
And there you have it, a fascinating discussion all about where the capital market revolution goes next, talking about the way that you can manage to get digital interconnectedness. And what's of course fascinating about that digital interconnectedness is how Africa has developed so quickly, things like M-Pesa, digital payment methodologies that are using mostly mobile technology, having leapfrogged the idea of having let alone copper cables in the ground, fiber optic cables in the ground. Nowadays, we're talking about African data centers having been built even in the course of the last 10 years. In situations where they're literally right underneath the pylons, the satellite towers, where the signal is coming in, because that's the best way to distribute around an area where often you can have remarkably low population in vast areas of fascinating and potentially very verdant agricultural land, or land rich with diamonds, minerals, and indeed the deserts too. And that, of course, means there's a huge opportunity to make greater interconnectedness of the African markets through the regions, through the whole of Africa, and indeed across the world. Now, one person who's been fabulous at interconnecting markets across the world during the course of his career was an old colleague of mine from the life floor, good grief, going back several decades, Jason Sten. Jason was a 15-year veteran market maker on the life floor. The only reason he didn't have more than 15 years was because they closed the floor effectively. He joined us on the 21st of May 2024 for IPO-VID number 144. What an appropriate for a technical analyst GAN number for him to happen to be representing in the IPO-VID canon. A seasoned trader speaks with Jason Sten, and he was coming to us from probably your second guess. Actually, he was in the heart of Thailand, where nowadays he has a magnificent villa from which he operates his trading business. Let's hear from Jason.
I think it really is all down to AI. I really do. I think that's going to be the next big thing. Was the next big thing for the whole world, isn't it? And as I said,
and there we are, back with AI, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's all really down to the AI. I really do. I think that's going to be the next thing for the whole world. And certainly it's intriguing to see how AI processes are gradually creeping into trying to help us make analysis on trading and even making trading decisions for themselves. Although, of course, that always leaves us with these worrying situations. And we have worrying situations in South Korea. I speak not of the coup, which is underway at the moment. I don't really know quite what's happening there, although I see my old friend John Hulsman is saying that it probably won't last. Rather, I'm thinking of something like the disaster which befell Hanmag Securities. Good grief, how long ago was that? 10, 12, 15 years ago, when Hanmag managed to go from, I think, positive 50 million to negative 30 million in the course of 143 seconds. Which also makes you think about the sort of timeline you have in blockchain settlements as to just how safe a new world that might be. So that was a very, very interesting discussion with Jason coming to us from his villa in Bali. And tonight, actually, ladies and gentlemen, we have only one more guest to show you from this part one of our review of the year, looking through the lens of where does the capital market revolution go next. Back to Rainer Zittelmann, our serial guest, the man who's been on the show more often than anybody else. He came to us on the 28th of May this year for IPO-VID number 145 with an absolutely magnificent book. I mean, if you're only going to read one book in Reiner's canon, I would definitely start here, because the truth is, once you've read one Rainer Zittelmann book, you're going to have to read them all. How nations escape poverty. So how do nations escape poverty? Well, that was the topic of number 145 and the topic of this fascinating book from the expert German historian, sociologist, and multiple best-selling author. Let's hear from Rainer. Where does the prosperity revolution go next for these countries that are escaping poverty?
If Milei will succeed, then it will start a capitalist revolution in Latin America. People in Colombia and in Venezuela and in Brazil, they will think, when it works there, why it doesn't work in our country?
What an interesting and profound thought. Well, I did twist the question slightly because I said, where did the prosperity revolution go rather than purely the capital market revolution? But the interesting topic was here, I mean, How Nations Escape Poverty was talking very, very closely about the experiences of quite disparate nations, Vietnam and Poland, and yet you saw many similar characteristics between the two of how they managed to succeed over time. And we were talking there about Milei, Xavier Milei. Apart from Donald Trump, I don't think any other politician has better shaped the course of the last year in the world. And certainly it was very exciting to see Mr. Milei, the president of Argentina, ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange in September during United Nations Week, after he gave a very, very exciting, pulsating several-minute speech on how free markets work and why free markets, if he's allowed to, are going to still the prosperity of Argentina, which after all was the seventh most prosperous country in the world at the end of World War II. And let's face it, if we could start a capitalist revolution in Latin America like Colombia, Venezuela, and Brazil, how wonderful that could be, because certainly Brazil has done amazingly well with its quasi-socialism. But just think what could happen if we had actual proper unfettered markets. And when it comes to Venezuela, well, of course, we all know the sad tale of that a democratically elected opposition who've effectively been crushed by the bus-driving president. And ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, what we need as we exit this show are more great case studies of economies that work, more great case studies of markets that work. And the good thing I think we can say from the vantage point of publishing Exchange Invest every day and working with many of these exchanges is just how many exchanges are thriving in the capital market revolution. Because don't forget, this is the age of the exchange. This is the capital market revolution writ large. It may be 25 years young, but nonetheless, it's just gaining pace at the moment in terms of how it's going to go forward and deliver prosperity around the world, thanks to those wonderful digital markets, possibly aided and abetted by AI, certainly being powered from the cloud, and quite possibly using real-world assets and tokenization, perhaps even using blockchains in order to deliver greater prosperity over time. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us elegantly to the end of our show. I would really, really appreciate it if you could hit the like button for us, please, ladies and gentlemen. We need to get our ratings up. We need as many people to watch this show and see what's happening. And we got a fabulous question from Anne Berg. So your year in review tells me that capital markets are further integrating despite the rise of protectionism and nationalism in commodities and goods. What a great point, Anne. I think that's a very, very apt statement. Although at the same time, I would also say, I think when we come back next year, we're going to find that all this talk about protectionism that came out of Trump, I think that's a negotiating phase. I think that if people behave themselves in a sensible and coherent, non-product dumping, globalized marketplace, we're actually going to be in a much, much better state of play. But nonetheless, it is a very, very interesting concept. Markets are thriving. Markets are integrating. On the other hand, and as you and I often discuss, the one thing we've got to also be aware of is that we're going to end this year with the United States of America getting on for something like 70% of the total capitalization of all stock markets across the world. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us quite obviously that the United States of America is succeeding incredibly, despite a pretty woeful government over the course of the last 4 years in terms of actually embracing capitalism and free markets. But Europe is lagging behind. Southeast Asia has not yet picked up the baton. China is in, well, if not recession, it still grows at several percent every year. But ultimately, its capital markets need to, and it's shot in the arm in order to manage to regain the excitement of recent years and actually play their part in the world. And that suggests to me that there's incredible growth to come, which may well knock the United States of America's global capital dominance back down a few percentage points, but it'll come through growth rather than necessarily a collapse of the US economy. Those are my views. Disagree with them? Well, join the debate and Exchange Invest every day as we look at the world's market structure, ladies and gentlemen. It's the only publication that looks at the business of bourses in every possible vestige of market infrastructure. And we have, if I do say so myself, a simply awesome track record of managing to understand what happens, what goes on. And indeed, we could have saved at least a couple of stock exchanges $100 million or more in legal fees if only they'd been listening to us. Cheap at half the price at $500 per user year. So thank you very, very much, Anne Berg, for that magnificent question. This has been part one of the IPO video review of the year. Next week, we're going to have part two. Join us again, 10th of December, midday Eastern Standard Time. I'll be coming to you, I do believe, from Poland next week. We're going to be reviewing the rest of the year and all sorts of exciting things that happened through the lens of the capital market revolution and that fabulous question that we ask every guest at the end of the show. It only remains for me to say thank you very much for viewing. Thank you very, very much to the fabulous production team who worked so hard on this. Thank you to AJ behind the scenes. In the galley tonight, we've had Janella, Jamil, Natalie, Racy, and I do believe also aided and abetted by Kim in the background. Fabulous show all round, ladies and gentlemen. Join us next week. It's our final show of the year, Review of the Year Part 2. My name is Patrick L. Young. I wish you all a great week in life and markets. And of course, if you want to join the stock market bandwagon, send us an email. We'll be happy to build your market. Meantime, if you want to learn more about how markets work, then look at Exchange Invest. ExchangeInvest.com, the only publication delivering the business of bourses daily to your inbox. Thanks for watching.